My sister ruined my life, and my parents gave me in one. If she is not invited to the wedding, they would kick me out, and then Planning a wedding is supposed to be one of the most exciting times in your life. At least, that's what people say. You pick out the dress, you taste cakes, you pick a venue. It's all supposed to be magical. But for me, wedding planning has been nothing but a minefield of emotions, especially with my family. Every decision I make seems to trigger something, especially now that my parents have become fixated on one thing. My sister Emma. I'd been in a good place emotionally, or at least I thought I was, after years of avoiding family drama. Nick and I had been together for 3 years, and when he proposed, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. We were both excited to start our lives together, to build something new, something just for us. But, of course, nothing is ever that simple, especially when your family can't leave the past where it belongs. My sister, Emma, and I used to be close. Growing up, she was my best friend. She was always the one I looked up to, the one who made me feel safe when things were hard. I admired her for as long as I can remember. She was 2 years older, and that age difference didn't seem to matter until everything started to fall apart. We were in college when it happened, but the memory of it still feels fresh, like a wound that never fully healed. I was a sophomore, and Emma was finishing up her senior year. It was during that time that I started dating Mark, my first serious boyfriend. I was in love, or at least what I thought was love back then. Mark was charming in that cocky, slightly arrogant way that made girls swoon. I didn't see the red flags at first, maybe because I didn't want to. When you're young, you think that love can survive anything. You think that if you just love someone enough, it'll all work out. I couldn't have been more wrong. What I didn't know back then was that Emma and Mark had been hooking up behind my back for months. It wasn't just a drunken one-night mistake, either. It was a full-blown affair. They both swore they didn't mean for it to happen, that it just did, as if that was some kind of excuse. I found out one night when I came home early from a weekend trip with some friends. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had originally planned to be gone until Sunday, but something came up, and I decided to head back a day early. I remember walking into our shared apartment, thinking how quiet it was. Then, as I turned the corner into the living room, I saw them. Emma and Mark, tangled up on the couch like they hadn't a care in the world. At first, I couldn't believe it. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My brain didn't want to process it, like it couldn't be real. But it was. It was real, and it was happening right in front of me. I'll never forget the way Emma's face went pale when she saw me standing there. She scrambled to get off the couch, as if moving faster would somehow erase what I had just seen. Mark, on the other hand, didn't even bother trying to apologize. He just sat there, staring at me, like he was annoyed that I had ruined their little moment. It's strange how, in those moments, you feel like your world is shattering around you, but everything else stays the same. The room didn't spin. The walls didn't cave in. It was all so normal, so mundane, except for the fact that my sister had just destroyed everything I thought I knew about love and family. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember if I screamed or cried or just turned around and left. What I do remember is that Emma didn't chase after me. She didn't even try. After that night, I cut them both out of my life. Mark was easy to get rid of. He was just a boyfriend, after all. He didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. But Emma, losing her was like losing a part of myself. She had been my constant, my rock, the person I thought would always have my back. And now, all I could see when I thought about her was betrayal. For years, I avoided family gatherings where she would be. It wasn't hard at first. She moved out of state for a job after graduation, and I stayed local, finishing up school and then starting my career. But my parents never quite understood why I refused to forgive her. They knew what had happened, of course. Emma eventually confessed everything to them, claiming that it had been a mistake and that she was sorry. But her apology never meant much to me. Sorry doesn't fix something like that. Sorry doesn't undo the fact that my own sister slept with my boyfriend. Over time, my parents started to pressure me to move on from it. They acted like it was something trivial, like a sibling fight over clothes, or something equally unimportant. They always brushed it off, saying things like, "She's your sister, Rachel. You have to forgive her at some point." But I didn't. I couldn't. The wound was too deep, and the scars still ached, even years later. Now, with my wedding fast approaching, my parents have brought it up again. They expect me to invite Emma. They want me to pretend like nothing ever happened, as if we can just sweep all the pain and betrayal under the rug for the sake of appearances. And it's not just a suggestion anymore. They're serious. So serious, in fact, that they've started threatening to skip the wedding altogether if I don't invite her. I feel like I'm being pulled in 1,000 different directions. On one hand, I want to stand my ground. I don't owe Emma anything. She's the one who destroyed our relationship, and she's never done anything to truly fix it. Inviting her to my wedding would feel like a betrayal of myself, like I'm saying that what she did doesn't matter. But on the other hand, this is my wedding. The day that's supposed to be about me and Nick, about our future together. I don't want it to be overshadowed by family drama, and I certainly don't want to start this new chapter of my life with my parents' absence hanging over me. I've always cared too much about what my parents think. I know that. It's one of my flaws, and Nick's pointed it out more than once. He loves me, but he doesn't understand why I let them have so much control over my decisions. He's always been more independent than me, less concerned with pleasing everyone else. But for me, it's not that simple. I don't want to be the reason my family falls apart. I don't want to be the one who causes my parents pain, even if they don't fully understand how much I've been hurt by Emma. I've been lying awake at night, going over all of it in my head. The wedding is coming up fast, and I need to make a decision soon. Do I invite Emma and let my parents attend the wedding, even though it'll feel like I'm betraying myself? Or do I stick to my guns and risk losing my parents on one of the most important days of my life? No matter what I choose, it feels like I'm going to lose something. And that's the hardest part. I just don't know if I'm ready to make that choice. The days after that conversation with my parents were filled with an uncomfortable, simmering tension. My mother called me several times, her tone alternating between guilt-inducing disappointment and forced calm. It was as though she was trying to remind me of what it meant to be a good daughter, to uphold family values, and to avoid letting past grievances affect the present. She would ask how the wedding planning was going, if I needed any help with the guest list or last-minute details, but it was always a prelude to the real topic at hand, Emma. She never let me forget that Emma was still family, no matter what had happened between us. And of course, there were always mentions of how much my father and she were looking forward to the wedding, as long as the whole family would be there. Each conversation left me feeling more conflicted and exhausted. I tried to focus on the practical aspects of the wedding, the dress fittings, the flower arrangements, choosing the perfect song for our first dance. But everything I did felt overshadowed by the unspoken ultimatum looming over me. I would find myself staring blankly at my to-do lists, wondering how it all had come to this. How had my wedding, which should have been a time of joy and celebration, turned into a battleground for my family's unresolved issues? Nick was trying to stay supportive, though I could tell the constant tension was starting to wear on him too. He wasn't the kind of person to indulge in family drama. He believed in solving problems quickly and directly, not dragging them out for years like I had done with Emma. I think part of him was starting to get frustrated with my inability to just move on, as he would phrase it. To him, the solution seemed simple. Either invite Emma and get on with it, or don't, and be prepared to deal with the fallout. But for me, there was nothing simple about it. The situation escalated when my parents invited me over for dinner a few nights after one of those tense phone calls. I had a feeling it wasn't going to be a regular family dinner. There was a formality to the way my mother asked me to come over, as though she had prepared something more than just a meal. The moment I stepped into their home, I could sense it in the air. There was a heaviness, a tension that felt almost suffocating. We sat at the dinner table, eating in near silence. My father occasionally tried to steer the conversation toward neutral topics, but there was no ignoring the elephant in the room. I kept bracing myself for what I knew was coming. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my mother set her fork down and looked at me with a serious expression, her voice quieter than usual, but heavy with meaning. It wasn't just a suggestion anymore. It wasn't even a request. It was an ultimatum. She told me, with my father nodding in agreement, that if I didn't invite Emma to the wedding, they wouldn't attend. It was as simple as that. I remember feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. All the air seemed to leave the room in an instant. They wouldn't come to my wedding. my own parents, because I refused to forgive my sister for betraying me in one of the worst ways possible. My mother tried to justify it, saying that they couldn't, in good conscience, support a wedding that excluded one of their daughters. Family comes first, she reminded me. My father's silence was just as painful as my mother's words. He rarely spoke up in situations like this, always letting my mother take the lead when it came to emotional confrontations. But his quiet approval of her ultimatum hit me just as hard. I had always been close to my father growing up, but in this moment, it felt like he was choosing sides, and not mine. I left their house that night feeling completely torn apart. On the drive home, I kept replaying their words in my head, trying to make sense of the betrayal I was feeling all over again. It wasn't just Emma who had betrayed me, it was my parents too. They were using my wedding, the one day that was supposed to be about me and Nick, as a bargaining chip to force me to reconcile with someone I wasn't ready to forgive. It felt cruel, manipulative, and deeply unfair. For days afterward, I could barely function. I went through the motions of wedding planning, but everything felt wrong. I would sit in front of my computer, staring at the guest list, my mind wandering back to my parents' ultimatum. How could they do this to me? How could they expect me to put on a smile and pretend that everything was fine, when the person who had hurt me the most was standing there, playing the part of the supportive sister? The pressure from my parents only grew more intense. My mother continued to call, but the conversations were becoming shorter and colder. She would ask me if I had made a decision yet, as though it was some sort of business transaction, not a deeply personal choice that could alter my relationship with my family forever. Each call was a reminder that time was running out, that my wedding day was drawing closer, and I still didn't have a solution. I tried talking to Nick about it, but even he was starting to lose patience. He wasn't angry, but I could sense the frustration building in him. He didn't want this family drama to overshadow our wedding, and honestly, neither did I. But it felt like I was trapped in an impossible situation. If I invited Emma, I would feel like I was betraying myself. But if I didn't, I would be walking down the aisle without my parents there to witness it. Either way, I felt like I was going to lose something precious. Then, one afternoon, I made the difficult decision to confront Emma directly. I wasn't sure what I hoped to achieve, but I knew I needed to hear from her again, to see if she had changed at all over the years. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to resolve this without completely breaking apart my family. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in years, except for a few awkward encounters at family events where we both pretended the other didn't exist. The meeting was awkward from the start. Emma greeted me cautiously, as though she was afraid I might explode at any moment. I could tell she was nervous, and it only made me feel more distant from her. This was the same person who had once been my best friend, my confidant, the one I trusted with all my secrets. Now, she was practically a stranger. We sat across from each other, and I could feel the weight of all the years of hurt and resentment between us. I hadn't realized just how much anger I still carried with me until I saw her again. Seeing her face brought it all rushing back, the betrayal, the pain, the way she had destroyed everything I thought we had as sisters. She tried to apologize again, but her words felt hollow, just like they had all those years ago. She said she had been in a bad place back then, that she hadn't meant to hurt me the way she did. But those words didn't make it any easier to forgive her. And then, just as I was about to leave, Emma dropped a bombshell. She said there was something I didn't know about Mark, something that had been weighing on her for a long time. My mind was spinning as she told me that she hadn't been the only one. Mark had been cheating on me with other women too, behind both of our backs. Apparently, Emma had found out about it not long after their affair, and it had broken her as well. I left that meeting more confused than ever. On the one hand, it didn't change what Emma had done. She had still betrayed me, no matter what Mark's role had been. But now I felt like the situation was even more complicated than I had thought. Mark had been manipulating both of us, and I started to wonder if Emma had been a victim too, in her own way. Did that mean I should forgive her? Did that mean I had been too harsh all these years? The days that followed were a blur of confusion and inner conflict. I knew I had to make a decision soon, but every time I thought I was close to one, something would pull me back in the opposite direction. My wedding day was approaching fast, and with it, the The pressure to either reconcile with Emma or face the reality of my parents abandoning me on the most important day of my life. After my meeting with Emma, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than I had ever realized. It was like a shadow creeping into my thoughts, making me question everything I thought I knew about that time in my life. Mark had always been the villain in my mind, but now there were layers of complexity that I hadn't been willing to see before. It made me feel even more disoriented, like my sense of reality was slipping. How could I have been so blind back then? How could I not have seen who Mark really was? Emma's revelation about Mark cheating on both of us had cracked open something inside me. I had spent years focusing all my anger and resentment on her, because she was the one who had betrayed me directly. But now that I knew Mark had been stringing along other women behind both of our backs, it felt like my rage was shifting. Instead of being a straightforward story of betrayal between two sisters, it was now something much murkier, something tainted by deception and manipulation on a larger scale. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Even though I had tried to put Mark behind me years ago, I found myself going down a rabbit hole, revisiting memories I had tried to bury. I started reaching out to old friends from college, people who had known us both back then. I wanted to know if there had been signs that I had missed, red flags that should have warned me about the kind of person Mark really was. One of those friends, Katie, had been particularly close to Mark and me during that time. She and I hadn't stayed in touch much after college, but I remembered that she had always been perceptive, someone who saw things others missed. I asked her about Mark, half hoping that she would tell me Emma was wrong, that Mark hadn't been cheating on me with anyone else. But Katie didn't do that. Instead, she confirmed my worst fears. Katie admitted that she had seen Mark with other women multiple times during our relationship, though she had never told me because she didn't want to get involved. She hadn't known how to approach me with the information back then and didn't want to cause trouble, but now, years later, she regretted staying silent. I could hear the guilt in her voice as she recounted times she had seen him at bars or parties, flirting with other girls, disappearing into rooms with them, always acting like he didn't have a girlfriend. It was devastating to hear. I had spent so long thinking that Emma's betrayal was the only thing that had shattered my trust in people, but now I realized it had been much bigger than that. Mark hadn't just cheated on me with Emma. He had been cheating on me with God knows how many other women throughout our relationship. I had been blind, naive, wrapped up in my idea of what love was supposed to be. It was almost too much to process. I felt like my entire past had been a lie, like the foundation of my emotional life had been built on sand. This new information didn't make what Emma had done any less painful, but it did change the way I saw her role in everything. She had been manipulated by Mark just as much as I had. I wasn't ready to forgive her, not by a long shot, but now I couldn't help but feel a tiny crack in my armor of resentment. Maybe she hadn't set out to betray me. Maybe she had been caught in the same web of lies that had ensnared me. Maybe, in some twisted way, we had both been victims of Mark's manipulations, even if Emma's actions had hurt me in the most personal way. Still, none of this solved the larger issue hanging over my head, my parents' ultimatum. With the wedding date creeping closer, the pressure was mounting. I was losing sleep over it, my mind racing every night as I lay in bed next to Nick. He knew something was wrong, of course. He could see the bags under my eyes, the way I would stare off into space, lost in thought. He asked me about it, but I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain to him that my entire understanding of my past relationship, of my family dynamic, was being unraveled before my eyes? I was terrified that this new information would change how I saw my parents, too. I had always thought that they were oblivious to the extent of Mark's deceit. But now, a tiny voice in the back of my mind was starting to ask, what if they knew? What if they had been aware, on some level, of what was going on and chose to look the other way because it was easier than dealing with the truth? After all, they had defended Emma back then, minimized her betrayal, and pushed me to reconcile with her almost immediately. It made me wonder if they had done the same thing with Mark. If they had seen things they didn't want to see and just decided to sweep it under the rug for the sake of maintaining peace. The thought made my stomach churn. I wasn't sure I was ready to face that possibility, but it was getting harder to ignore. My parents had always been so focused on family unity, on keeping up appearances. They hated confrontation, hated anything that might make us look less than perfect from the outside. It was possible that, in their minds, it had been easier to pretend like Mark was a decent guy than to acknowledge the chaos he had caused in our lives. As these thoughts swirled in my head, I found myself growing angrier, not just at Mark, but at my parents, too. If they had known about his cheating, if they had looked the other way, then they were just as responsible for the mess that had unfolded between me and Emma. They were the ones who had let it fester, who had refused to take my pain seriously. And now, here they were, years later, trying to force me to invite Emma to my wedding, as though everything that had happened was water under the bridge. I couldn't believe the position I was in. I was supposed to be focused on my future, on marrying Nick and building a life together. But instead I was being dragged back into the past, forced to relive every painful moment. It wasn't fair. I deserved to have my wedding be about me, about love, not about family drama. But no matter how hard I tried to push those feelings aside, they kept creeping back in, gnawing at me, reminding me that I couldn't escape the past no matter how much I wanted to. I knew I had to make a decision soon. The invitations needed to be finalized, the seating chart arranged, the guest list confirmed. Time was running out. But every time I thought I was close to making a choice, something would pull me back. I would think about my parents, about how devastated they would be if they didn't come to the wedding. I would think about Emma, about how much more complicated her betrayal had become in light of everything I had learned. And I would think about Mark, about the way he had poisoned so much of my life without me even realizing it. I felt like I was stuck in a loop, trapped between the past and the present, unable to move forward. The weight of it all was crushing me, and I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. Every decision seemed like the wrong one. If I invited Emma, it would feel like I was betraying myself. But if I didn't, I would be betraying my parents, and possibly even Nick. The closer the wedding got, the more desperate I became for some kind of resolution. But no matter what I did, there was no easy way out. The past had a grip on me, and I didn't know how to break free. As the wedding loomed closer, the pressure built to an unbearable degree. Each day felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for something to crack. My parents were relentless, their calls more frequent and their tone increasingly impatient. They weren't asking me to invite Emma anymore. They were demanding it. My mother's guilt trips grew more intense, her voice dripping with disappointment every time we spoke. She reminded me, again and again, that family should come first, that I couldn't let old grudges ruin the most important day of my life. My father, though less vocal, was clearly on her side, his silence punctuated by the occasional sigh of frustration. Meanwhile, Nick was growing distant. He was trying to be supportive, but I could tell that this constant family drama was weighing on him, too. Our conversations about the wedding had shifted from excited discussions about our future to tense, stilted exchanges about my family. He had never been one to tolerate drawn-out conflict, and I knew that this was starting to take a toll on him. He loved me, but he didn't understand why I couldn't just make a decision and stick to it. Every time I brought up Emma or my parents, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He was trying not to show it, but I knew he was frustrated. And I didn't blame him, but I was frustrated too. It felt like no matter what I did, I was going to lose. If I invited Emma, I'd be betraying my own sense of self, my own boundaries. But if I didn't, I'd be risking my relationship with my parents and, increasingly, with Nick. The pressure to keep the peace was suffocating. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It felt like this decision was going to define the rest of my life, like whatever choice I made would set the tone for all my future relationships. The breaking point came one evening, just a few weeks before the wedding. My mother called again, her voice more clipped than usual. This time, there was no pretense of asking for my opinion or gently suggesting that I reconsider. She was firm, almost cold, as she told me that if I didn't invite Emma, they wouldn't be attending the wedding. Period. No negotiations, no further discussion. It was an ultimatum, plain and simple. The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had known this was coming, but hearing it said out loud made it all the more real. My own parents wouldn't come to my wedding, the day that was supposed to be about celebrating love, unity, and the start of a new chapter, because of my refusal to forgive Emma. They had chosen Emma's presence over mine, chosen to prioritize a facade of family unity over the very real pain I had been carrying for years. After that call, I felt like I was falling apart. I couldn't hold it together anymore. The walls I had been trying to keep up, the calm exterior I had maintained, all came crashing down. I broke down, crying in a way I hadn't in years. All the emotions I had been trying to suppress came rushing to the surface: anger, betrayal, sadness, and a deep, aching sense of loss. I had lost Emma years ago, but now it felt like I was losing my parents too, and in the most painful way possible. Nick found me later, sitting on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by half-written thank you notes and wedding brochures. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me quietly, but I could feel his frustration, his confusion. He didn't understand why I was letting this destroy me, why I couldn't just move on and focus on what really mattered: our wedding, our future together. He was practical, and to him, the solution seemed obvious: invite Emma, make peace, and avoid all the drama. But to me, it wasn't that simple. Inviting Emma would feel like invalidating everything I had been through, like giving in to the pressure that had been suffocating me for years. I wasn't sure if I could live with that. We didn't fight, not exactly, but the tension between us had never been stronger. Nick suggested, almost offhandedly, that maybe we should just elope. Forget the wedding, forget the guest list, forget the family drama. Just the two of us, starting fresh without any of this weighing us down. I knew he wasn't entirely serious, but the suggestion hurt all the same. It felt like he was saying that my feelings, my struggle with my family, weren't worth dealing with, that the easiest solution was to run away from it all. For the first time, I wondered if Nick was having second thoughts about the wedding. We had always been solid, but this situation had put a strain on us that I hadn't expected. I knew he was tired of the endless back and forth, tired of seeing me upset, tired of the uncertainty hanging over our big day. And I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if I could make him understand why this decision was tearing me apart. Part of me even started to question if he was right. Maybe we should just elope and leave all this behind. Maybe the best way to move forward was to stop looking back. But deep down, I knew that running away wasn't the answer. I couldn't just sweep everything under the rug. This was about more than just the wedding. It was about my relationship with my family, with my sister, with myself. If I didn't confront it now, it would follow me forever, casting a shadow over every holiday, every family gathering, every major life event. I had to face it, even if it broke me in the process. In a moment of clarity, I decided I needed to talk to Emma again. The first conversation had left me with more questions than answers, but I knew I couldn't move forward without hearing her out one last time. I wasn't sure what I hoped to accomplish. Maybe I was looking for closure. Maybe I was just trying to find a way to make peace with the past so I could move on. Either way, I needed to face her, to confront the pain head-on. The meeting with Emma was tense from the moment we saw each other. The weight of all those years of unresolved conflict hung between us, thick and oppressive. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but also the fatigue. She was tired of this too, tired of being the villain in my story. And yet, as we sat there in silence, I couldn't bring myself to feel pity for her. She had made her choices, and those choices had destroyed our relationship. Emma spoke first, her voice soft, but I could hear the sincerity in her words. She apologized again, and for the first time, it felt like more than just an obligatory admission of guilt. She seemed to truly regret what had happened, not just for the damage it had done to me, but for how it had torn our family apart. She admitted that she had been selfish, that she hadn't considered the long-term consequences of her actions. But she also told me that she had been living with the weight of that guilt every day since, and it had taken its toll on her too. I sat there, listening to her, feeling my anger start to loosen its grip. It didn't vanish completely. How could it? But it softened, just enough for me to hear what she was saying. For the first time in years, I saw Emma not as the woman who had betrayed me, but as my sister. My flawed, imperfect, human sister, who had made a terrible mistake and was trying, in her own way, to make amends. When I left that meeting, I wasn't sure what my next step would be. I wasn't sure if I could forgive Emma, or if I even wanted to, but I knew that something had shifted. The weight of the past didn't feel quite as crushing as it had before. I wasn't ready to make a decision about the wedding yet, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The breaking point had come and gone. Now, all that was left was to figure out what to do next. As the wedding day approached, the weight of everything finally began to settle. There were only a few days left, and the decision that had consumed me for so long could no longer be delayed. I had spent countless nights wrestling with the choices in front of me, caught between the desire to stand up for myself and the fear of losing my family. But something shifted after my last meeting with Emma. Her apology, while not erasing the past, had opened a door I hadn't realized was still closed, a door to the possibility of moving forward. The tension with Nick had become more palpable, but in those final days, I found clarity in the stillness. I loved him, and I didn't want the past to destroy what we had built together. But more than that, I didn't want to start our marriage burdened by the unresolved pain that had haunted me for years. The choice wasn't really about Emma anymore. It was about reclaiming control over my own life and deciding what kind of future I wanted to create. I knew I couldn't let my parents' ultimatum dictate my happiness. It had become clear that their idea of family unity wasn't about healing. It was about appearances. But I also realized that, in their own flawed way, they had been trying to protect what they believed was important. The truth was, if I didn't invite Emma, I would lose more than just my parents' presence at the wedding. I would lose any chance of rebuilding my relationship with them, and perhaps, with Emma too. In the end, I made the decision to invite Emma, but it wasn't out of obligation or to appease my parents. It was a decision for me, for my peace of mind, and for the hope of something better, even if it wasn't perfect. I knew that forgiveness wouldn't come easily, and it wouldn't be immediate. But allowing Emma to attend my wedding was a way of acknowledging that we both deserved a chance to heal, even if it would take time. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. My parents were there, as were Nick's family and our friends. Emma showed up too, standing quietly in the back, unsure of her place in the celebration. It wasn't a dramatic reunion or a tearful moment of reconciliation, but it didn't need to be. The simple fact that she was there was enough. As I walked down the aisle toward Nick, I felt lighter than I had in years. The pain of the past wasn't gone, but it no longer controlled me. In that moment, surrounded by the people I loved, I realized that moving forward didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant choosing to build something new in spite of it. It meant allowing space for healing, even if the scars remained. The wedding was beautiful, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on the love and joy of the moment. I knew the road ahead with Emma and my parents wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own narrative. I had made my choice, and it was one I could live with. And in the end, that was enough. If you like this story, subscribe right away and listen to new stories every day. Let us know what you like the most in the comments.